The light inside Beacon Hill Community Church was the color of old honey. It streamed through tall, arched windows depicting scenes of serene apostles, bathing the pews in a warmth that felt ancient and absolute. On Sundays, this light seemed to caress Elder David Miller most of all. It caught the silver in his temples and ignited a righteous fire in his eyes as he stood to lead the opening prayer. His voice, a rich and certain baritone, filled the sanctuary, a sound as solid and comforting as the oak pulpit he gripped taught to the congregation. The Millers were a testament to God's grace. David, a pillar of the community, a man whose counsel was sought and whose handshake was a promise. And beside him, his wife, Maria. She was a quiet miracle, a woman who had come from the Philippines with little more than her faith and had found a new life, a fine home, and a devout husband in America. She was beautiful in a fragile, unassuming way, her long, dark hair always pinned in a neat chignon, her dresses modest and immaculate. When she smiled, it was a shy, fleeting thing that made people want to protect her. She was, they whispered to one another, so very lucky. Maria felt the weight of their love pressing down on her, heavy as a shroud. She held her hymnal, but the notes on the page blurred into a cage of black bars. Her smile was a carefully constructed mask, one she had perfected over 7 years. Beneath it, a silent scream was coiled tight in her gut. The scent of old paper and lemon polish was thick in the air, but all she could smell was the cloying, spicy scent of David's aftershave, a fragrance that clung to the air in their home like a warning. His hand rested on the small of her back, a gesture that looked like affection to the dozens of watching eyes. Maria felt it for what it was, a brand, a claim. Beside her, 12-year-old Grace sat unnervingly still. She wasn't fidgeting like the other children. In her lap was a sketchbook, but she wasn't drawing. Her gaze, dark and serious like her mother's, flitted from David's beatific face to Maria's placid mask. She saw what others missed, the subtle tightening of her mother's jaw when David's voice rose in feigned humility, the almost imperceptible flinch when his hand settled on her. On the page of her sketchbook, Grace had drawn a beautiful, ornate birdcage. Inside, a small, colorless bird sat on the perch. There was no door dot. The 90-minute service felt like a lifetime. When it was over, the onslaught of fellowship began. A powerful message, David, truly, said Mr. Abernathy, clapping him on the shoulder. It is not my message, brother, but his, David replied, his voice resonating with practiced piety. Martha, a kind-faced woman from the church council, squeezed Maria's arm. You are looking lovely as ever, Maria, a testament to a peaceful home. Thank you, Martha. You are too kind, Maria murmured, her eyes downcast. Peaceful. The word was a slap. Their home was not peaceful. It was quiet. The silence in their pristine, beige-walled house was a living entity, a suffocating blanket woven from unspoken rules and unshed tears. The drive home was conducted in that same heavy silence. David hummed along to a hymn on the radio, tapping, his fingers on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Grace stared out the window, watching the neat suburban houses blur past. Maria focused on her breathing, a shallow, controlled rhythm. In, out. Don't provoke. Don't exist too loudly, Dot. The moment the front door clicked shut, the warmth of the Sunday sun vanished. David's smile dissolved. The roast is in the oven? He asked. It wasn't a question. Yes, David, at 250, just as you like. Good. He loosened his tie, his eyes scanning the immaculate living room as if searching for a flaw. Pastor Mike mentioned the donation drive for the mission in Bolivia. I told him we would double our contribution from last year. Maria's heart sank. David, my mother. The doctor said she needs a new medication. It's expensive. I was hoping. David turned to her, his expression not of anger, but of deep paternal disappointment. It was somehow worse. He walked over to her. and took her hands in his. His grip was firm. "Maria," he said, his voice dropping to a low, persuasive murmur, "we have spoken of this. The Bible teaches us to leave our former lives behind when we are born again in Christ. Your family, they're good people, I am sure, but their needs are worldly. Our duty is to God's kingdom first." He squeezed her hands. Matthew 6:24, "No one can serve two masters. Who is your master, Maria? Me, your husband under God, or the endless wants of a life you left behind?" He made it sound so reasonable, so holy. He was an expert at twisting scripture into a weapon, each verse a new bar on her cage. He controlled the money, of course. She was given a small allowance for groceries, for which she had to provide every single receipt. Her calls to her family in Cebu were monitored, her time on the phone logged. He often sat in the room with her, his presence a silent censor, forcing her to speak in cheerful platitudes while her heart was breaking. Later that evening, Maria found a moment of reprieve. David was in his study, preparing his notes for the weekly men's fellowship. Grace was in her room, the door shut. Maria slipped into the small sunroom at the back of the house. It was her only sanctuary, filled with the few plants she had been allowed to keep. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was not in suburban Ohio. She was back in her family's bustling, chaotic kitchen in the Philippines. She could smell the sharp, sweet scent of calamansi and the sizzle of garlic and coconut oil. She could hear the raucous laughter of her brothers, the rapid-fire Tagalog of her sisters, her mother's voice calling her name, a sound rich with unconditional love. "Maria, anak." "My child." The memory was so vivid it was a physical pain. Here she was not anak. She was David's wife, a symbol, a possession, a bird in a gilded cage, forgetting how to sing because it could no longer remember the sky. She opened her eyes and saw Grace standing silently in the doorway, watching her. There were no tears on Maria's face, but her daughter saw them anyway. Grace's expression was one of profound adult sorrow. She walked over and wordlessly took her mother's hand. Her small fingers wrapped around Maria's, a tiny anchor in a vast, silent sea. In that moment, looking into her daughter's dark, knowing eyes, Maria felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't hope. It was a terrifying, fragile spark of rebellion. And it terrified her because she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that David would do anything to extinguish it. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was not a day of thunder and lightning, but one of gray, oppressive drizzle that matched the perpetual climate of Maria's soul. The phone call was her one sanctioned indulgence of the week 30. Minutes to speak with her family in Cebu, a time allotted with the magnanimity of a warden granting yard time. David was working late at a church council meeting, a rare opportunity for privacy. Her sister, Elena, answered, her voice a frantic buzz of Tagalog over the crackling line. Their mother, Teresita, had taken a turn for the worse. The doctor had been clearer. A new, expensive medication was her only real chance. He said, "If we can't get it this week, Maria." Elena's voice broke. "We pulled everything we have. It's not enough. I wouldn't ask, I swear, but we're desperate." Maria's blood ran cold. She stood in the gleaming, silent kitchen, clutching the cordless phone, the curated perfection of her American life feeling like a cruel joke. "How much, Elena? Tell me exactly how much." As her sister named the sum, Maria's mind raced. It was more than a year's worth of her grocery allowance. It was an impossible figure, but the thought of her mother, the woman whose laughter was once the soundtrack of her life, fading away on the other side of the world, it was unthinkable. "Let me talk to her," Maria whispered, tears choking her. Her mother's voice came on the line, weak and breathless, but still her mother's. "Anak, Mama, Maria sobbed, sinking into a kitchen chair. I'm here, Mama. Don't you worry. I will get the money. I promise you I will get it. She didn't hear the back door open. She didn't hear the soft tread of his shoes on the tile. She only knew he was there when the phone was plucked from her hand. David stood over her, his face unreadable, the scent of rain on his coat. The meeting ended early, he said. His voice calm, he put the phone to his own ear. Hello? Maria could hear the tinny, confused sound of her mother's voice. This is David Teresita, he said, his tone sickeningly polite, the one he used on strangers he wished to impress. Maria is quite busy with her duties here. I'm afraid she can't talk right now. We will be praying for your health. Goodbye. He pressed the end call button. The click echoed in the kitchen, a sound as final as a gavel. David, no. Maria cried, reaching for the phone. Please, she's sick, she needs me. She needs to place her faith in the Lord, not in American dollars, David said, setting the phone back in its cradle with chilling precision. He looked down at her, his eyes cold. And you need to remember your promise to me, to this life. Your obsession with them is a sickness, Maria. It is a worldly attachment I will not allow to fester in this house. He walked away, leaving her crumpled in the chair, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on her, heavier and more absolute than ever before. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in a fog of grief and despair. She was only roused by a small hand on her shoulder. It was Grace, her face pale, her dark eyes burning with an intensity that startled Maria. She had been in the living room doing her homework. She had heard everything. She saw her mother's silent, streaming tears, the utter powerlessness that had crushed her spirit. And in that moment, the child in Grace receded, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. Her mother was a prisoner, and it was up to her to find the key. That night, long after the house fell into its tense slumber, Grace's room was a bubble of quiet rebellion. Lit only by the glow of her school-issued tablet, she began her work. Her search history was a flurry of queries: how to recover deleted texts, best free cloud storage, is it legal to record someone in your own home in Ohio? The answers were a complex mix of tech jargon and legal gray areas, but the core idea was simple: proof. She needed undeniable proof. The next weekend, she used a $20 Amazon gift card from her last birthday to buy a year's subscription to a secure, obscure cloud storage service based in Switzerland. It was untraceable to David's credit cards. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Under the guise of wanting to back up family photos so we never lose them, she asked for her mother's phone. That's very thoughtful, sweetie, Maria said, handing it over with a weary smile. Grace took the phone to her room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her fingers, usually nimble on a touch screen, felt clumsy and slow. She downloaded the Sync app, hid it in a folder with other useless pre-installed apps, and entered her anonymous login details. She configured it to automatically upload every photo, every video, every text message, incoming and outgoing too. Her secret cloud account. It would even capture the things David deleted. They would exist, safe and silent, on a server an ocean away. The first piece of evidence arrived 2 days later. Maria received a text from her sister. Please, Maria, just tell us you're okay. We're so worried. Grace, checking the cloud from her tablet, saw the message appear. An hour later, she saw it vanish from the phone's timeline. David had deleted it. But in her cloud, the message remained, a digital ghost, a perfect testament to his control. The recording started a week after that. Grace began leaving her tablet. Screen off, on a bookshelf in the living room, the microphone active. At first, she captured hours of silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the low murmur of the television. Then she caught it. David's voice, not the measured baritone of the church, but a low, menacing snarl. berating Maria for being 5 minutes late from the grocery store. Where were you? Talking to someone? Filling your head with nonsense? Do you know how it looks, my wife loitering in public? It reflects on me. Listening to the recording later, hidden under her bed covers with headphones on, Grace felt a tremor of fear and vindication. This was his true voice. Over the next 2 months, the digital archive grew. It became a secret, painful library of Maria's suffering. There was the screenshot of a loving email from her brother, deleted. There was the audio file of Maria softly crying in the kitchen, followed by David's impatient sigh and the words, "Oh, stop it. Your tears are manipulative." There was a short, shaky video Grace managed to take from her doorway, showing David throwing a stack of mail onto the table in a fit of pique because a bill was higher than he expected. His face contorted in a mask of rage. Grace became a meticulous archivist of her family's pain. She labeled every file by date. Oct12 _ deleted text _ Elena.png. Oct19 audio _ groceries.mp3. double quotes. Novo4 video _ mail.mp4. double quotes. The cloud account became a vault. And with each new piece of evidence, Grace felt a strange and heavy power growing within her. It was the power of the witness, the keeper of the truth. It was a terrifying burden for a 12-year-old to carry, a secret that isolated her and set her apart. But every time she looked at her mother's fading smile and haunted eyes, she knew it was a burden she would carry, no matter the cost. She was no longer just watching. She was waiting for the perfect moment to press play. The approach of winter mirrored the chilling of the atmosphere in the Miller household. Maria moved through her days like a phantom, her steps light, her voice barely a whisper. The vibrant woman from the Philippines was receding, leaving behind a pale, compliant shell. Her isolation was now almost total. David had suggested she step down from the church's bake sale committee, explaining to others that she needed to focus on her home and her health. In reality, it severed. One of her last remaining social threads, one afternoon, Martha, the kind-faced council member, caught her in the church parking lot. "Maria, dear, we miss you. A few of us are getting coffee on Thursday. Please say you'll come." Maria's heart gave a painful lurch of longing. Coffee, laughter, normalcy. "Oh, Martha, I would love to, but David feels at his best. Rest." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Martha's brow furrowed with concern. "Of course, dear. Well, we're praying for you." She patted Maria's arm, her touch full of genuine, if misguided, sympathy. The misguided sympathy was a poison of its own. A week later, Maria was summoned to a private chat with Martha and Carol, the pastor's wife. They sat in the church's sterile meeting room, a plate of untouched cookies between them. "Maria," Carol began, her voice soft and earnest, "we want you to know we are here for you. But marriage, especially a marriage in Christ, requires sacrifice. David is a man of great spiritual authority, and that is a heavy burden to carry. Sometimes a wife's greatest ministry is to create a sanctuary of peace for her husband, to quiet her own spirit so his can flourish." Martha nodded in agreement. Perhaps he could focus on anticipating his needs, making his homecoming a joyous event. A happy home can soothe a weary man's soul. They were trying to help. Maria knew that. They were speaking the language. They had been taught the language of wifely submission and male headship that was woven into the very fabric of their community. But their words were just more bars for her cage. They were unknowingly siding with her jailer, polishing the gilded exterior while she languished within. She nodded and thanked them, her spirit shrinking another inch. For Grace, the weight of her secret was becoming immense. It lived in a locked folder on her tablet, a digital tumor growing day by day. The burden manifested in dark circles under her eyes and a new, sharp defensiveness. Her English teacher, Mr. Harrison, a young, perceptive man, asked her to stay. After class one day, "Is everything okay, Grace?" he asked gently. "Your last few assignments? They're not up to your usual standard. You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Grace said, her voice flat, her eyes fixed on a poster of the solar system on the wall. "Just tired." He didn't push, but his concerned gaze followed her as she left. She felt like a spy living behind enemy lines, and her own home was the war zone. At night, she'd lie in bed, headphones on, reviewing the evidence. She had to force herself to listen to her father's cruelties, to watch her mother's silent pain. Each clip was a fresh wound, a reminder of what was at stake. This was not a game. It was a promise she had made to her mother, a vow sealed in a moment of shared tears in a sterile kitchen. The opportunity, when it came, felt like a divine sign and a terrifying curse. It was the first Sunday of Advent. Pastor Mike, his face beaming, stood at the pulpit to make a special announcement. "Friends, as we enter this season of hope and family, we want to do something special. On the Sunday before Christmas, we will be holding our first ever Family Testimonial Sunday. We invite families to come up and share a short story of how faith has blessed their home, a testament to God's goodness in our community." A murmur of excitement went through the congregation. Before the pastor had even finished, David's hand shot into the air. "Pastor, the Miller family would be honored to participate," he boomed, his voice full of righteous enthusiasm. He placed his hand firmly on Maria's shoulder, a gesture of public ownership. "We would be delighted to share how the Lord has blessed our union." Maria froze, her blood turning to ice. A public testimonial, a performance of their perfect life on stage, in front of everyone. It was her worst nightmare. She looked at David, at his triumphant, smiling face, and felt a wave of nausea. But then she looked at Grace. Her daughter was not looking at David. She was looking at the large projection screens flanking the pulpit. A strange, chilling light had entered her eyes. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was hardening into place, a plan. In David's arrogant move to showcase his prize, he had unwittingly provided the one thing Grace needed most: a stage, an audience, and a spotlight. The next 2 weeks were a blur of tense preparation. David rehearsed his speech, filling the house with his booming voice as he practiced phrases about a cord of 3 strands and a submissive and gentle spirit. He was in his element, preparing for his star turn. Meanwhile, Grace prepared. In silence. Her bedroom became a clandestine production studio. She downloaded a simple video editing app. With the precision of a bomb disposal expert, she began to assemble her weapon. She chose the clips with painstaking care. She didn't want to seem vengeful, but irrefutable. She started the video with the photos David proudly displayed on their mantle, their wedding day, Grace's baptism, the public face of the Miller family. Then she skillfully cross-faded to a photo she had taken secretly, of her mother staring blankly out the window, her face a portrait of quiet despair. As that image held on the screen, she layered in the audio. David's voice, low and menacing. "Your tears are manipulative." She followed it with a screenshot of the deleted text from Elena, the bright red letters of the message a stark accusation. Then the audio of him ending the call with her sick mother. She worked late into the night, her small hands moving deftly on the tablet screen. She was not just editing a video. She was building a case. She was crafting a key. It was the heaviest thing she had ever held, and soon she would have to find the courage to turn it in the lock. The Sunday before Christmas arrived, cloaked in a pristine, deceptive blanket of snow. The world outside was hushed and beautiful, a Carrier and Ives painting that bore no resemblance to the silent, screaming tension inside the Miller family's car. David drove, humming a Christmas carol, his face glowing with anticipation. He was wearing his best suit, a dark charcoal gray that made him look distinguished and authoritative. Maria sat in the passenger seat, a statue carved from ice, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. In the back, Grace clutched her tablet inside its case, the cool, hard plastic a stark reality against her trembling legs. Beacon Hill Community Church was packed. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the towering Christmas trees flanking the stage and the sweet, waxy smell of Advent candles. A festive energy buzzed through the pews, a stark contrast to the cold dread coiling in Grace's stomach. As they took their seats in the front row, the seats of honor, the stained glass windows fractured, the morning light into jewels of ruby and sapphire that danced across David's face, making him look for all the world like a saint. Other families went first, sharing heartwarming stories of faith helping them through financial struggles and illness. The congregation was primed, their hearts open and receptive. Then Pastor Mike smiled warmly. And now we're so blessed to hear from the Miller family. David, come on up. David strode to the pulpit with the easy confidence of a king ascending his throne. He gestured for Maria and Grace to join him, positioning them slightly behind him, like supporting actors. Maria moved as if in a dream, her feet disconnected from her body. Grace walked with a slow, deliberate gait, each step an act of supreme will. The large wooden lectern felt like a giant's fortress. Brothers and sisters, Merry Christmas, David began, his voice wrapping the room in a warm embrace. When Pastor Mike announced this opportunity, I knew we had to share our story. For our family is a testament to the transformative power of God's plan. He turned and smiled at Maria, a gesture of performative tenderness. I found my beloved Maria in a world away, a woman of deep and simple faith. And in our union, we have found that true Christian marriage is a beautiful dance of strength and gentleness. He spoke for 10 minutes. He quoted Corinthians on love. He quoted Ephesians on wifely submission. He praised Maria's quiet spirit and gentle heart, masterfully reframing her fear as piety, her silence as holy reverence. The congregation was captivated. Nods of agreement and whispered amens rippled through the pews. He was painting their masterpiece, the portrait of a perfect Christian family, and he was the master artist. So I stand before you not as a perfect man, he concluded, his voice thick with emotion, but as a blessed one, blessed by a God who provides, and blessed by a wife whose quiet strength is the bedrock of our home. He raised his hand as if in benediction. The applause was warm and heartfelt. Pastor Mike stepped forward, wiping a tear from his eye. Thank you, David. Truly beautiful. Maria, Grace, would either of you like to add anything? This was it. David smiled indulgently, about to decline for them. My wife is a woman of quiet. I would, Grace said. Her voice was small, but in the expectant hush it cut through the air like a shard of glass. Every head turned towards her. David's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. I made something, Grace continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength. A video, a sort of digital testimonial. To show how blessed we are, a murmur of charmed appreciation went through the crowd. How sweet, Pastor Mike smiled. Of course, dear. Let's get you hooked up. A technician helped her with the cables, connecting her tablet to the church's audio-visual system. The moment felt agonizingly long. Grace fumbled with the connector, her fingers slick with sweat. David's eyes were on her now, his smile gone, replaced by a confused narrowing of his brow. He started to take a step toward her to stop this. Unexpected deviation from his script, but it was too late. The tablet's home screen flashed onto the 2 enormous projection screens. Grace tapped the file named Our Family's Blessing. The video began just as she had planned, with the happy photos. David and Maria's wedding, Grace's baptism. The congregation smiled. Then the image cross-faded to the secret photo of Maria staring out the window, her face a mask of sorrow. A collective, confused silence began to fall. And then came the audio. David's voice, not the warm baritone from the pulpit, but a cold, sneering snarl filled every corner of the sanctuary. "Your tears are manipulative." A gasp rippled through the front rows. David's face went white. On the screen, the screenshot of the deleted text from Elena appeared, bright and accusatory. "Please, Maria, just tell us you're okay." Then came the audio of the phone call. They heard David's sickeningly polite voice dismissing her dying mother. "We will be praying for your health. Goodbye." They heard the final brutal click. A wave of shock, silent and profound, washed over the congregation. People stared, mouths agape, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Carol, the pastor's wife, looked as if she'd been struck. They were not just hearing abuse. They were seeing the scaffolding of the lie they had all unwittingly helped to build. The final clip was the shaky video of David throwing the mail, his face twisted in a silent snarl of rage. Grace let the image hold for 5 long seconds before the screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavier and more damning than any sound. Every eye in the building was on David Miller. His mask was not just cracked, it had been utterly obliterated. His face was a ghastly canvas of disbelief, fury, and raw, naked panic. But Grace wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her mother. Maria stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. But these were not the silent, hopeless tears Grace knew so well. Her mother's head was lifting slowly as if against a great weight. Her eyes, wide and full of a terrible, beautiful, painful clarity, met Grace's across the stage. And in that shared gaze, a 7-year sentence was served. A cage door, rusted from disuse, finally creaked open. The testimonial was complete. The black screens held the congregation in a state of suspended animation for what felt like an eternity. The first sound was a single, ragged sob from the front row Martha, her face buried in her hands. The first movement came from Pastor Mike. His jovial Christmas Sunday face was gone, replaced by a mask of grim, solemn authority. He stepped to the pulpit, his eyes avoiding David, and spoke into the microphone, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "This service," he said, each word a heavy stone, "is concluded." It broke the spell. A low murmur swept through the church as people began to stir, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and pity. 2 of the other elders, Mr. Abernathy and Mr. Cole, rose from their seats. They didn't stomp or shout. They walked calmly, deliberately, to the stage and stood on either side of David, creating a quiet, unbreachable barrier. They didn't touch him, but their presence was a clear message. "It's over." David, who had been frozen in abject horror, finally snapped. "This is a lie." He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, lunging toward Grace. "She's a child. She doesn't understand." Before he could take a second step, Mr. Abernathy put a firm hand on his chest. "Not now, David, not here." As the men dealt with David, the women created a sanctuary. Carol and Martha rushed to the stage, not to Maria the victim, but to Maria the survivor. They wrapped their arms around her, forming a protective circle, shielding her from the curious stares and the wreckage of her husband's life. "Maria," Martha whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Oh, dear God, Maria, we are so sorry. We didn't see. We didn't listen." It was not an excuse, but a confession. And in that moment, Maria, leaning into their embrace, felt the first stirrings of a community she never knew she had. She looked past them to Grace, who was being gently guided off the stage by her teacher, Mr. Harrison, who had watched the entire scene unfold from the back with a look of fierce, protective pride. The days that followed were a blur of quiet, decisive action. The Millers' home was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, albeit one without yellow tape. The church board immediately arranged for Maria and Grace to stay in a small, furnished apartment owned by a church member, a cozy 2-bedroom that felt more like a home in its first 10 minutes than the sterile house had in 7 years. That first night, after a dinner pizza eaten out of the box on the floor, Maria did something she hadn't done freely in years. She picked up her new, untraceable cell phone provided by the church and video called her sister. When Elena's face appeared on the screen, joyous and tear-streaked, followed by the faces of her brothers and finally her mother, propped up in bed but smiling, a dam inside Maria broke. She wept, but they were tears of release, a torrent of grief and joy and relief that washed away years of silence. The money for her mother's medicine had been wired that morning, an anonymous gift from the church's discretionary fund. For the first time, her family saw her not as a distant, lucky relative in America, but as their Maria again. They saw Grace, who waved shyly from beside her mother, and they showered her with praise in a rush of Tagalog, calling her Matapang brave the church, to its credit, did not sweep the scandal under the rug. David was formally excommunicated, stripped of all titles and responsibilities. The board made it clear that any path to reconciliation, however remote, would require years of intensive, professional counseling for abusive behavior, something David, in his narcissistic rage, refused. They connected Maria with a top-tier immigration lawyer, pro bono, who immediately began working to secure her green card independently of her marriage, freeing her from David's legal hold. 6 months later, spring had returned to Ohio. The world was green and full of promise. Maria, too, was blooming. She had her driver's license. She was enrolled in English and computer classes at the local community college. She had a part-time job at the church daycare, where her gentle nature, now unburdened by fear, made her a favorite with the children. On a warm Tuesday evening, she stood at the head of a folding table in the church basement. The room was plain, but it was full. Around the table sat a dozen other women, immigrants from Mexico, Somalia, Ukraine, and Vietnam. This was the first meeting of the New Beginnings support group, a project Maria herself had proposed to Pastor Mike. "My name is Maria," she said, her voice soft but steady, a far cry from the timid whisper of before. "And for a long time, I thought my story was about silence. But I learned that it's really about finding your voice." Sitting beside her was Grace, no longer just a digital witness, but a young mentor. She was patiently showing a woman from Haiti how to set up a 2-factor authentication on her email account. She looked up and caught her mother's eye, and they shared a small, knowing smile. As Maria continued to speak, sharing her journey not with shame, but with strength, a sound filled the small basement room. It was her own laughter, a sound that had been a stranger for so long. It was clear and warm and full of life. It was the sound of a bird, not just freed from its cage, but finally remembering the vast, open, and endless beauty of the sky. It was the sound of sanctuary,